Tomorrow, you're about to enter one of the most singular days of the year, and the vast majority of people will sleepwalk right through it, not because they lack intelligence, not because they aren't trying, but because they'll repeat the exact same reflexes they've always had, without ever questioning what they're carrying with them. Tomorrow is Saturday, 14th. This date has traveled through centuries loaded with symbols, superstitions, and fear. Movies turned it into an aesthetic, stories turned it into a threat, and popular culture turned it into something many people anticipate with suspicion, as if the mere presence of that number on a calendar were enough to transform an ordinary day into something hostile. But here's what most people don't know. What makes or breaks a day is never the date itself. It's what you bring to it. And before certain days arrive, there are habits, weights, and ways of thinking that are better left outside. What I'm going to share with you today is exactly that. A list of things to set down before tomorrow, not for mystical reasons, but because if you walk into this day lighter, clearer, and more grounded, then this day, whatever its reputation, can become something unexpected. Let's start with something simple, almost too simple to mention. Every morning, most people get up and leave their bed exactly as they left it. Wrinkled sheets, a bunched-up blanket, pillows scattered everywhere. Then they turn their backs on it and move on, as if that small corner of their space didn't matter at all. But here's what most people don't realize. Your bed is often the first thing you see when you open your eyes, and it's often the last thing you see before you close them. What you perceive first and last in a day leaves a subtle imprint on your mind. It has nothing to do with cleanliness or perfection. It's about signal. When you leave your space in disorder, your brain registers, unconsciously, that your environment is unfinished, that things are not under control. And that signal, however quiet, colors the atmosphere of your entire morning. Making your bed, on the other hand, is laying the first intentional stone of your day. It's a tiny act that tells your mind, here, I have some degree of mastery. Here, I took care of my space. It's Saturday, the 14th arrives. Repeat this simple gesture. Reset that space. Because stepping into your day from an environment that feels ordered changes something in the atmosphere of your home that people constantly underestimate. And now, let's talk about something that has nothing to do with the space around you, something that concerns what you carry inside. There's something almost everyone does, and almost everyone will immediately recognize once it's clearly named. In the vast majority of cases, you already know which direction you should take. You feel it. Not dramatically, not with absolute certainty, but there's a direction. An inner voice that orients you, a sense that arrives before you've even had time to reason. And yet, instead of following that signal, you spend time questioning it, seeking confirmation from the outside, waiting for someone else to tell you what you've already understood on your own. Intuition doesn't work through complete files and neatly organized arguments. It works through impressions, through feelings, through that slight resistance you experience when something doesn't sit right with you, even if you couldn't quite explain it yet. And here's what most people do with that intuition. They treat it like a rough draft, something to correct, to validate, to submit to others for review. They ignore it, contradict it, or drown it in so much analysis that they eventually stop hearing it at all. The result? Decisions stretch far longer than they need to. Situations become complicated where they were once simple, and choices that could have taken 5 minutes become internal debates lasting weeks. Before tomorrow, set this habit down. Stop treating what you feel as a hypothesis that needs a jury to be validated. That calm, quiet sense of direction is often infinitely clearer than all the opinions you seek outside yourself. And once you stop doubting your own clarity, you begin to notice something else about days like tomorrow. The vast majority of people have been conditioned to see Saturday the 14th as something negative. Movies turned it into an icon of horror. Popular superstition made it a day to dread. And over generations, this idea settled into collective consciousness like a given, On that day, be careful. On that day, things go wrong. On that day, the ordinary world grows slightly darker. And this conditioning has a very precise effect. When someone begins a day expecting something bad to happen, their mind enters problem detection mode. It starts scanning the environment for confirmation. A message that arrives late becomes a bad sign. A minor, unexpected event becomes proof that the superstition is real. An ordinary discomfort suddenly feels like something bigger. But in most cases, nothing unusual actually happens. What happens is that the filter of expectation transforms ordinary reality into something that resembles a threat. Expectation shapes experience far more than any date on a calendar. When someone wakes up believing their day will be chaotic, they become hypersensitive to every small frustration. Their attention fixes on problems rather than possibilities. They move through the day in defensive mode, watching for what else might go wrong. But if someone approaches that same day with neutrality, or better yet, with mild curiosity, something different unfolds. They stay calm and present. They move normally. They make better decisions and avoid unnecessary stress. This shift in perspective reveals something essential. The meaning of a day rarely comes from the calendar itself. It comes from the attitude someone brings to it. Expect problems, and you'll see problems. Expect clarity, and you'll notice opportunities. The day doesn't change. The mindset makes all the difference. Here's a habit few people notice in themselves, yet one that influences a large portion of their daily decisions. Many people have built a significant part of their identity around being perceived as good, kind, understanding, and helpful. On the surface, this seems positive. Kindness and compassion are real and valuable qualities. But here's where problems begin. When the desire to be seen as good moves beyond simple goodwill and becomes a need to maintain an image. When someone is constantly preoccupied with how others perceive them, they start modifying parts of themselves. They mask frustration even when it's legitimate. They avoid disagreement because they don't want to seem difficult. They suppress emotions that might make them appear less agreeable. Over time, this creates a permanent pressure, constantly managing how others see them. Instead of responding honestly to situations, they begin performing a version of themselves that matches what others expect. They smile when they're irritated. They stay silent when they want to speak. They approve of things while something inside them clearly says they shouldn't. The problem with this habit is that it progressively disconnects someone from their own instincts. Instead of responding according to what they truly feel, they respond according to what preserves their image. And this can lead them to tolerate things they shouldn't tolerate, to stay silent about things that genuinely matter. This pressure to maintain the identity of the good person often begins early in life. Many people learn very young that agreement and compliance generate approval. They become the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never causes problems. But in adulthood, this role can become a cage. Before tomorrow, notice if you're carrying this weight, because being a good person should never cost you your voice. While many treat Friday the 13th as something threatening, other people genuinely look forward to it with enthusiasm. The reason is simple and quite fascinating. When a day already has a reputation for being unusual, people feel less pressure to behave predictably. The day interrupts the ordinary rhythm of routine thinking. It no longer feels like a carbon copy of the day before. And that small psychological shift can transform how people approach their decisions. Someone who's been hesitating for weeks about a choice might finally make it. Someone who's been postponing a difficult conversation might finally have it. Someone who's been thinking about trying something new might finally take that first step they kept delaying. The day becomes a kind of psychological permission. Because people already expect it to be unusual, they become more willing to step outside their habitual patterns. Sometimes the power of a day comes from the story people attach to it. If someone believes the day will be unlucky, they become cautious and hesitant. They second-guess themselves and move with suspicion. But if someone sees this day as an opportunity to act boldly, their attention shifts in an entirely different direction. Instead of scanning for problems, they start noticing possibilities they would normally overlook. Many people who approach Friday the 13th this way end up having surprisingly productive days. They stop overanalyzing every decision and simply move forward on something they'd been putting off for too long. The day's unusual reputation actually frees them from the habits that normally slow them down. And when someone breaks even a single pattern they were stuck in, momentum begins to shift. Instead of fearing the day, they use it as a moment to change direction and create movement where there was only hesitation. When someone becomes more aware of their own life, something subtle begins to change in how they experience ordinary moments. They start noticing patterns that most people walk through without ever realizing they were there. These patterns aren't dramatic. They aren't mystical in the way people sometimes imagine. In most cases, they appear through simple, everyday situations that suddenly carry more clarity than expected. You might be in the middle of a casual conversation with someone, and a single sentence they say suddenly makes sense of a situation you'd been turning over in your mind for weeks. Maybe you were walking alone, and a thought surfaces that connects pieces of your life in a way you'd never seen before. A situation that seemed complicated suddenly appears much simpler. These moments are often small, but they can be incredibly powerful. What's interesting is that these insights don't only arrive on special days. They happen constantly. The reason most people miss them is that their attention is scattered. They move from one responsibility to the next, check their messages, think about the next task, and they almost never give themselves a moment to fully register what's happening around them. For example, someone might hear an offhand comment from a colleague that suddenly confirms something they'd been sensing about their career for a long time. Another person might have a quiet moment where they realize why a certain relationship drains so much of their energy. Someone else might understand that an opportunity they'd been hesitating over actually makes perfect sense for where they're headed. These realizations aren't magical. They're the result of awareness catching up with information the mind was quietly processing in the background. Your mind observes patterns constantly, even when you're not consciously thinking about it. It notices when certain situations repeat. It registers when something feels aligned and when something feels off. But these observations often stay beneath the surface until a moment of calm allows them to connect. This is why awareness can be so valuable on days like tomorrow. If you approach the day with curiosity rather than fear, you'll often find yourself noticing things you'd been leaving aside. And if tomorrow brings these kinds of moments, the most important thing is simply to let them be. Don't analyze everything immediately. Don't turn it into a major decision on the spot. Sometimes the value of a realization is simply understanding something that seemed confusing. Everyone carries past experiences that have shaped them in one way or another. Difficult relationships, rejection, disappointment, betrayal, loss. All of this is part of the human experience. These moments leave an emotional imprint, and acknowledging them is an important part of self-understanding. Painful experiences often teach valuable lessons about trust, boundaries, and resilience. They show what truly matters. They reveal parts of ourselves we might never have discovered otherwise. But sometimes something unexpected happens after these experiences. Instead of simply acknowledging the wound and drawing lessons from it, people begin to build their identity around it. The wound becomes the way they define themselves, their way of explaining who they are and why they do what they do. From that point, neutral situations start to feel threatening. A simple disagreement can taste like betrayal. A delay in communication can trigger the anticipation of abandonment. The mind begins interpreting new experiences through the lens of old pain. Your wounds explain part of your story, but they were never meant to become your identity. This distinction is critically important for growth. When someone lives from their wounds, they're constantly looking backward. Their energy is spent protecting themselves from repeating the past. Their decisions are guided by the fear of being hurt again, rather than by curiosity. From that point, neutral situations start to feel threatening. A simple disagreement can taste like betrayal. A delay in communication can trigger the anticipation of abandonment. The mind begins interpreting new experiences through the lens of old pain. Your wounds explain part of your story, but they were never meant to become your identity. This distinction is critically important for growth. When someone lives from their wounds, they're constantly looking backward. Their energy is spent protecting themselves from repeating the past. Their decisions are guided by the fear of being hurt again, rather than by curiosity about what might be possible. But when someone integrates their past experiences instead of defining themselves by them, something changes. The experience becomes knowledge. It becomes wisdom about what they value, what they deserve, and the kind of life they want to create. The past still exists, but it no longer controls every interpretation of the present. Someone who experienced betrayal might initially see every disagreement as a sign that history is repeating itself. But when they begin to integrate the experience instead of living from it, they learn to separate the past from the present. They recognize when something is genuinely problematic and when their mind is simply reacting to an old memory. When someone releases the identity of the wound, they often feel a freedom they didn't expect. The past is still there, but it stops occupying the center of their life. It becomes a chapter in a much larger story rather than the theme of the entire book. And when that shift happens, something else becomes possible. Instead of living in reaction to what has already happened, a person begins living with intention toward what they want to create next. That's where real growth begins. Helping others is generally seen as a good quality. But there's a point where helping stops being healthy and starts becoming compulsive. Some people feel responsible for fixing every situation around them. When someone complains, they immediately offer solutions. When a friend goes through a hard time, they feel obligated to step in. When there's tension in a room, they assume it's their job to smooth things over. Over time, this creates a pattern where they become the person everyone turns to when something goes wrong. At first, it feels meaningful. It feels like support and usefulness. But gradually, it becomes something else. They start absorbing other people's stress, other people's problems, other people's responsibilities without even realizing it. One reason this happens is that helping becomes tied to their sense of worth. They begin to feel valuable only when they're solving problems. If no one needs them, they feel restless or useless. So they keep inserting themselves into situations that don't truly belong to them. This need to be needed can quietly become a trap. And what makes this dynamic even more complex is that it can unintentionally keep both people stuck. The helper keeps solving problems, and the other person keeps bringing them. Neither is forced to step outside this pattern. One remains dependent, and the other remains responsible. Most people will wake up tomorrow and move through the day exactly as they moved through yesterday. Their rooms will look the same, their routines will be just as scattered, and their attention will be pulled in 10 different directions by the same old habits. They won't question anything. They'll carry the same clutter into the day without even realizing it. And when nothing seems different at the end, they'll simply say that Friday the 13th was nothing special. But the people who took a few small steps before the day arrived will move through it differently. Their space will feel calmer because they cleared it. Their body will feel more rested because they stopped certain habits the night before. Their environment will feel more intentional because they removed small sources of chaos that normally go unnoticed. Saturday the 14th has nothing to do with fear or superstition. It's simply another moment to reset, to move forward a little lighter, and to let go of what was never meant to stay with you forever. So when tomorrow comes, enter that day with calm. You don't need to rush. You have nothing to prove. Simply move through the day with a clear mind and a steady rhythm. And who knows, sometimes the days people dread the most turn out to be the ones that quietly move them forward.